What happens when a judge orders a black disabled veteran to stand during sentencing, unaware he physically can't? In a courtroom packed with tension, silence falls as a man remains seated. This moment sparks a powerful revelation that changes everyone's perception and moves the entire court to tears. Let me tell you about the day that courtroom went silent. Not just quiet, I mean dead silent, like someone had just sucked all the air out of the place. It was one of those moments where everyone was looking at one man, and yet no one really saw him until it was too late. I was there, sitting a few rows behind the defendant's table. The whole place smelled like old books and polished wood, and the only sounds were the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough. And then came the judge's voice. "Stand up for your sentencing, Mr. Harris." Just like that. No emotion, no second thought, like it was just part of the routine. But Jared Harris didn't move. Before we dive into the deepened story, please subscribe to this channel. Now, at first, I thought maybe he didn't hear it. He was just sitting there in his chair, not looking up, his hands folded in his lap. He was wearing that old military jacket of his, the one with the faded patches that you could barely read anymore. His wheelchair was still like a statue. The judge repeated it. "Mr. Harris," I said, "stand up." That's when the whispering started. You know how people get uncomfortable and start murmuring under their breath? Some folks were looking at each other like, is this guy refusing to comply? Others were already judging him. You could see it on their faces. But he didn't say a word, didn't flinch, just sat there, staring straight ahead. The judge leaned forward, clearly irritated now. "Is this your idea of defiance?" And right then, Jared's attorney stood up, looked straight at the judge, and said, in the calmest voice you can imagine, "Your Honor, he can't." That's when the room changed. It was like every single person had been slapped across the face. I remember the gasp that came from the gallery. One woman clutched her purse like she just remembered something she should have known. The prosecutor fumbled his pen. Even the bailiff shifted where he stood. And the judge, oh man, the judge just sat there blinking, like someone had pulled a curtain back. See, what no one in that room seemed to realize, or maybe what they conveniently forgot, was that Jared Harris was a disabled veteran. Not just any veteran. Mind you, he was a decorated Army sergeant who served 3 tours overseas. A man who literally gave up the use of his legs when he dove on a grenade to save his squad. He got a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star. Hell, there were medals they didn't even pin on him because he didn't want a ceremony. But on this day, in this courtroom, all they saw was a defendant. And that's the part that gets to me. You know how they say justice is blind? Well, sometimes she's not just blind, she's asleep at the wheel. Jared didn't ask for any special treatment. He didn't roll into that courtroom wearing his medals or telling his story. No, he came in like any other man caught in a bad situation, ready to face it head on. And they treated him like a nobody, like some criminal off the street. I looked at him then, really looked, and in his eyes, you could see it. That look of someone who's seen things you can't even imagine, who's been through war, through pain, through betrayal, but still held his head high. He didn't defend himself, didn't shout or protest. He let his silence speak. And that silence, it roared louder than anything I'd heard in the courtroom. The judge picked up the file again. This time, he really looked at it, like, really read what was in front of him. There was a note from the VA, medical records, even a letter from his former commanding officer. All of it sitting in that file the whole time, just waiting for someone to care enough to read it. Then the judge took off his glasses. He looked down at Jared, and the courtroom just held its breath. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I owe you an apology. I swear you could have heard a pin drop." He went on, slowly, carefully. "This court failed to acknowledge who you are, what you've done, and what you continue to endure. Asking you to stand was not only inappropriate, it was shameful. Now, let me tell you something. You don't often see tears in courtrooms. Not like this. But people were crying. The bailiff turned his head. Even the prosecutor looked like he wanted to disappear. The judge cleared his throat again, and his voice cracked just a bit. This man served our country with honor. He stood when we could not. And today, I asked him to do something he physically cannot do. That was wrong. the charges against him dismissed. And just like that, it was over. But the story had just begun. People stood up, applauded. A few even came down to shake Jared's hand. The boy he defended, Malik, I think his name was, ran up and hugged him. And Jared? He smiled just a little. Not a big grin, but the kind of smile that says, I finally got a piece of my dignity back. That day stayed with me, because it showed me that even heroes can be forgotten, can be humiliated, unless someone speaks up. So yeah, that's what happened in that courtroom. A judge made a mistake. A man was misjudged. But truth, as it often does, found its way to the surface. And when it did, it moved everyone to tears. Let me take you back before all that drama unfolded, before the judge's bench, before the packed courtroom. If you want to understand Jared Harris, you need to understand where he came from, not just the war stories or the wheelchair. I'm talking about the man himself, the one who used to run 2 miles before breakfast, who coached the neighborhood kids on weekends, and who never let anyone open a door for him. Jared grew up in East Baltimore, raised by his grandmother, a tough-as-nails woman named Loretta, who believed in God, hard work, and standing tall, even if the world tried to knock you down. He was the kind of kid who always brought home strays, dogs, cats, even a pigeon once. Said every creature deserved a second chance. By 17, he'd already enlisted in the Army. Said he didn't want to end up like some of the guys he grew up around, locked up or laid out. The military gave him purpose, structure, brotherhood, and man, he excelled. Quick on his feet, sharper than most, and loyal to the bone. But war changes people. It breaks some, steals others. In Jared's case, it did both. During his 3rd tour in Afghanistan, his convoy hit an IED just outside Kandahar. Fire, chaos, screaming. In the middle of it all, a live grenade rolled into a tent where his squad was taking cover. Without hesitation, Jared dove on it. He survived. Barely. Spent 9 months in recovery. Doctors told him he'd never walk again. Jared just nodded and said, Guess I'll just roll faster than the rest of you. Back home, things weren't easier. Jobs were scarce, especially for someone in a chair. Benefits were tangled in red tape. And the pain, the real, raw, everyday kind, never left him. Still, he managed, volunteered at the VA, mentored younger vets, and became something of a quiet legend in the neighborhood. So when that kid Malik got jumped one night near a convenience store, Jared was there, rolled right into the middle of it, not caring about the danger. He took a blow to the shoulder, called the cops, and stayed with Malik till help arrived. Turns out one of the punks claimed Jared assaulted him, claimed the wheelchair was a prop. Cops didn't question it, didn't ask Jared anything. They arrested him on the spot. Yeah, that's how he ended up in court. No medals, no thank yous, just handcuffs and silence. And that's where the story really begins. You ever see a man try to disappear in plain sight? That's what Jared Harris looked like sitting in that holding cell after they arrested him. Just him, his worn-out jacket, and 4 cold concrete walls. And you could tell, the hardest part wasn't the arrest or even the handcuffs. It was the disbelief. The look on his face said it all. After everything I gave, this is how they repay me? But let me back up a bit. You already know Jared wasn't the kind of man to throw around his past like a business card. He never once bragged about his service. Never expected parades or pats on the back. That Purple Heart he earned? He kept it in a shoebox in the closet. Said he didn't need shiny reminders of things he lost. What he wanted was peace, a quiet life. And maybe in some corner of his mind, he thought he'd earned that peace. But life doesn't always give you what you've earned. When the cops showed up at the scene where he protected that teenager, they didn't see a hero. They didn't even ask questions. One of the attackers, a kid from a known gang, claimed Jared had pulled a weapon. Said he faked a wheelchair to attack them. Crazy, right? But you'd be surprised how fast people believe lies when they come packaged in noise and chaos. So they slapped cuffs on him right there on the sidewalk. Didn't check his ID. Didn't even notice the prosthetics beneath his jeans. Malik, the boy Jared saved, was screaming, He saved me. He saved me. But Nobody was listening. They loaded Jared into the back of the squad car like he was nobody. Now, you might think this is where the system would catch itself. Maybe the booking officer would read his file. Maybe the detectives would realize they'd made a mistake. But nah, he sat in that cell for 2 nights. 2 full nights before anyone even bothered to ask who he was. His court-appointed lawyer, a young guy named Avery, was the first one who seemed to care. And honestly, at first, even Avery didn't know what he was dealing with. He walked in with that typical lawyer swagger, flipping through a thin file, ready to chalk this up as just another minor assault case. But then he met Jared. And Jared didn't beg for help. He didn't cry foul. He just said real calm, "You might want to read a little deeper before you decide what kind of man I am." So Avery did. And that file started unfolding like a map. Discharge papers, medical records, testimonies from his old squad, a letter from a congressman. Hell, even a commendation from a general. That's when things started to shift. Avery filed a motion to dismiss. But the prosecution? They weren't letting go that easy. They had witnesses. Liars, sure, but they knew how to put on a show. So instead of justice, Jared got a trial date. And here's where it all started snowballing. See, once the story got out, once folks in the neighborhood realized what happened, the community rallied. Malik's mother got on local radio. Vets from the VA started showing up at hearings. Even Loretta, Jared's old Sunday school teacher, wrote a letter to the judge. But despite all that, when sentencing day came, nobody expected fireworks. Most people thought Jared would get probation, maybe a fine. Nobody expected the judge to snap at a man in a wheelchair and tell him to stand. And that's what haunts me the most. Not the ignorance, not the arrogance, but the casualness of it. Like the judge had done it 1,000 times before. Like Jared was just another name on a list. But that moment, that's when truth crashed through the ceiling. The look on the judge's face when he realized what he'd done. It was like he'd finally seen the man in front of him. Not just a file, not just a number. A man, a soldier. And that courtroom, that place where Jared had been judged and misunderstood, suddenly became the place where his truth was heard. I watched the prosecutor, the same guy who wanted to throw the book at him, quietly close his folder and sit down. His mouth was tight, but his eyes, they told the whole story. Regret, shame, maybe even a little bit of awe. And Jared? He didn't gloat, didn't even blink when the charges were dismissed. He just gave that small nod. That's the kind of man he is. Dignified, even when the world does him wrong. After the hearing, people were clapping. Not loud, not like a show, but respectful. A few folks approached him. One old vet stood there with tears running down his cheeks. Said he hadn't seen something so powerful since he came home from Vietnam. And Malik? He held Jared's hand so tight, like he was clinging to more than just gratitude, like he knew he owed his life to the man they almost threw away. But Jared never made it about himself. When reporters asked for a statement, he just said, "I hope the next man in that chair doesn't have to prove who he is." That stuck with me, because sometimes a uniform doesn't protect you. Sometimes a medal doesn't make you invincible. And sometimes the very country you fought for forgets your name. But that day, in that courtroom, Jared Harris reminded them all. He reminded us all. After the courtroom drama, most people think the story is over, that justice was served and life moves on. But if you really want to understand Jared Harris, you got to understand the quiet battles he fought every single day, the ones nobody sees. See, Jared's life after the war wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about reclaiming his voice, something that got lost beneath layers of pain, disappointment, and silence. You ever met someone who carries the world on their shoulders but never complains? That was Jared. He didn't want pity or attention. Hell, he even avoided the VA sometimes because it reminded him of everything he'd lost. But inside, every glance, every sideways look, every whisper behind his back chipped away at his pride. The incident with the cops and the courtroom humiliation, it wasn't just a moment. It was a symbol, a reminder that despite medals and sacrifice, he was still judged by the color of his skin and the chair he sat in. But here's the thing. Jared never let it break him. Instead, he turned that pain into something fierce. After the trial, he started speaking out, not just about his case, but about the bigger picture, about how veterans, especially black veterans, are often forgotten or overlooked. He gave interviews. He met with local leaders. And slowly, he became more than just a man in a wheelchair. He became a voice. At the same time, the community around him rallied even harder. Churches organized fundraisers. Local businesses donated to veteran causes. People who never met Jared found themselves inspired by his story. But with all that noise, Jared's personal battles remained mostly unseen. Nights were hardest. The pain meds never fully erased the aches, and the silence of his apartment sometimes felt heavier than any courtroom. Memories of the war, friends lost, moments of fear, would flood back. And then there was the guilt, survivor's guilt, the why me that followed him like a shadow. One night, after a long day of meetings and interviews, Jared sat by his window, staring out at the city lights. He thought about the judge, the courtroom Malik, and all the people who'd stood by him. He thought about his grandmother, Loretta, and how she always told him, "Boy, you were born to stand tall, no matter what." And for the first time in a long while, Jared allowed himself to hope. Hope that his story would change things. Not just for him, but for every veteran, every black man, every person who'd been misunderstood or mistreated. Because sometimes change starts with one voice. And sometimes that voice comes from the most unexpected place. So, after everything that happened in court and the buzz it created, Jared's life didn't suddenly turn perfect overnight. No, the road was still rocky. But sometimes life throws you a curveball when you least expect it. And that's exactly what happened to Jared one cool autumn afternoon. He was rolling through his neighborhood, just heading to the local community center where he volunteered. It was a small place, nothing fancy, but it meant the world to the people who came there, especially the kids and veterans. Jared liked the calmness, the sense of purpose it gave him. As he approached the center, he noticed a young woman sitting on the steps, looking lost and upset. Jared's instinct kicked in. He'd seen enough pain not to ignore it. "Hey," he said softly, pulling his wheelchair to a stop. "You okay?" She looked up, eyes red from crying, and shook her head. Jared could tell she needed someone to listen, not judge. "I'm Sarah," she said after a moment, wiping tears away. I don't know what to do." Jared nodded, understanding more than she realized. "Sometimes life throws too much at us all at once," he said. "But you don't have to face it alone." Sarah hesitated, then told him her story, a story about losing her job, feeling invisible, and battling anxiety that made every day feel heavier. Jared listened without interruption, and when she finished, he shared some of his own struggles. The war, the injury, the courtroom humiliation. But he also told her about the strength he found in community and the small victories that kept him going. "You know," Jared said, "sometimes the weight of the world feels like it's crushing you, but if you can find even one person who believes in you, it changes everything." That conversation sparked something in Sarah. She asked if she could come to the center more often, to volunteer or just hang out. Jared smiled. He was glad to have a new friend, but more than that, he was glad she'd found a reason to keep moving forward. Little did they both know, that chance meeting was about to change both their lives, and set off a chain of events neither could have predicted. Because sometimes when you're at your lowest, the universe sends someone who reminds you that hope still exists. After that day at the community center, things started to shift for Jared, not just in his world, but in the bigger picture too. You see, Jared wasn't content to let what happened in court be just a one-time headline. No, he wanted to make sure no one else had to go through the humiliation he faced. So he decided to take his fight beyond the courtroom. Jared began connecting with local veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and even some lawmakers. He wasn't a polished speaker or politician, but his story had power, a raw honesty that cut through the noise. He spoke about the lack of awareness when it came to disabled veterans, especially black veterans, how the justice system often failed to recognize the sacrifices they made, and how prejudice still reared its ugly head in places that were supposed to be fair and just. Jared pushed for training programs for law enforcement, programs that would teach officers to recognize and respect veterans, disabled people, and minorities. He wanted policies that protected those who had already given so much for their country. At first, it wasn't easy. Doors were closed. Some people didn't want to hear what he had to say. Others doubted that change was possible. But Jared's persistence was relentless. He held town hall meetings, joined panels, and even testified before a state committee. Each time, he shared not just his story, but the stories of countless others who have been overlooked, ignored, or mistreated. Meanwhile, Sarah, remember her from the community center, was right there beside him, helping organize events, rally support, and keep the momentum going. Their unlikely friendship had blossomed into a partnership fueled by shared passion and determination. But amidst the public battles, Jared still had personal hurdles. His health wasn't always steady. There were days when the pain flared up, when the memories crept in too strong, and when the weight of the fight felt crushing. Still, he kept going. Because for Jared, this wasn't just about one man standing up in court. It was about standing up for every veteran who deserved dignity, respect, and justice. And that fight, it was just getting started. So, after months of fighting and pushing for change, Jared was starting to feel the weight of it all. The endless meetings, the public speaking, the constant reminders of what had happened to him. It was exhausting. But just when things seemed like they might stall, an unexpected ally showed up. It happened at a city council meeting. Jared was there, ready to present his latest proposal for improved police training on recognizing and respecting disabled veterans. The room was packed, local officials, community members, and reporters. As Jared finished his speech, he noticed a man standing at the back of the room, tall, well-dressed, and quietly watching every word. After the meeting, the man approached him. "Mr. Harris," he said, extending his hand. "My name is Thomas Reynolds. I'm a captain with the city police department." Jared was cautious but shook his hand. "I've heard about your story," Reynolds continued, "and I want to help. We've been blind to some of these issues in our force, and I want to change that from the inside." It was a game changer. Captain Reynolds wasn't just offering words. He had the authority to start implementing the very training Jared had been campaigning for. Together, they began working on new policies, organizing workshops, and fostering conversations between officers and veterans. Reynolds' support gave Jared's movement credibility and opened doors that had been firmly shut before. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still officers resistant to change, skeptical of Jared's intentions, and some community members wary of working with the police at all. Yet, little by little, barriers began to fall. And for Jared, this alliance was more than strategic. It was a sign that even the hardest walls can crack when people are willing to listen. Even with new allies and growing support, Jared Harris carried a weight most people couldn't see. Beneath the public figure pushing for justice was a man haunted by memories that sometimes threatened to pull him under. You see, war doesn't just change your body, it changes your mind. Jared battled PTSD every day, often quietly, behind that calm exterior. One night, after a long day of meetings, Jared found himself awake in the dark, the silence louder than ever. The explosions, the screams, the faces of lost friends, they all came rushing back. His heart pounded, sweat soaked his brow, and he gripped his wheelchair armrest like it was a lifeline. He wanted to forget, to move on, but those memories wouldn't let him. That's when Sarah called. She knew when Jared needed her, even if he didn't say a word. "Hey, you awake?" Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm here." They talked for hours. Jared opened up about the nightmares, the guilt, and the frustration. He spoke about feeling invisible, not just in that courtroom, but in his own mind. Sarah didn't try to fix it. She just listened. Sometimes, that's all anyone needs. In the days that followed, Jared started attending a support group for veterans with PTSD. It wasn't easy, but sharing his story with others who understood made a difference. This chapter in Jared's journey reminded everyone that healing isn't just about justice outside. It's also about finding peace within. So here we are, back to that courtroom moment, the one that left everyone breathless and brought tears to so many eyes. But now, after all you've heard, it makes so much more sense, doesn't it? Jared Harris wasn't just a man in a wheelchair being ordered to stand. He was a hero, a survivor, a fighter carrying the weight of battles both seen and unseen. The judge's demand was not just a moment of insensitivity. It was a moment that exposed the gaps in our society's understanding, the blind spots in our justice system. But what happened next? That moment sparked something bigger than anyone expected. Jared's courage in silence, his unwavering dignity, and his refusal to be invisible forced the court and all of us to see him for who he truly was. And it wasn't just about Jared. It was about every veteran, every person living with disabilities, every individual who has ever been judged without understanding. With the help of unexpected allies and the support community that rallied around him, Jared turned pain into progress. He fought not only for himself, but for the countless others overlooked and unheard. He showed us that true strength isn't just standing up physically. It's standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And sometimes, standing tall means leaning on others, finding strength in connection and compassion. So the next time you see someone struggling, whether in a courtroom, on the street, or in life, remember Jared Harris. Remember that behind every person is a story worth hearing and a dignity worth respecting. Because justice isn't just about laws. It's about humanity. And that day, in that courtroom, humanity won. Thanks for watching this video.